So many years ago, I was invited in an engineering institution to give a talk. So the audience mostly consisted of engineers from various departments. I talked about Krishnamurti's approach to meditation. So after about talking for an hour and quarter, I invited the audience to ask questions. And somebody from the audience, he asked me a question, "Sir, what is meditation?" So the whole audience laughed. They said, "But that is what he has been talking about this whole hour and quarter. And still you are asking the question, sir, what is meditation?" He said, "No, but after listening to all this, I am still not very clear. What am I supposed to do if I want to meditate? You are not telling us that do this if you want to meditate." So obviously he was seeking for some kind of practical steps, practical hints as to how to go about this meditation. So I hope after our 3 sessions, we are not in the same situation. Are we clear as to what we are supposed to do if we want to meditate, or we are also like that engineer who are still not very clear as to what to do? If we ask Krishnaji, "Sir, what am I supposed to do? Exactly tell me." He will say, "Sir, find out for yourself. There is no point in telling me, because if I tell you, you will only mechanically repeat it. And therefore, there is no point in telling you. You have to find out for yourself." And so, we can't ask anybody, including Krishnaji, what to do if I want to meditate. So, if I have to find out for myself, what am I supposed to do if I want to meditate? In the sense Krishnaji has talked about meditation. So in that sense of meditation, if I want to meditate, what am I supposed to do? So I thought maybe we'll spend this last session in trying to find out what one is supposed to do if one wants to meditate, according to Krishnamurti's approach to meditation. So where one has to begin? So obviously we have to begin from what Krishnamurti is talking about. We are listening to his talk, and during his talk he raises questions, and then he invites us that you also ask that question, and then try to understand it, try to find out the implications of that question, what it means, what could be the resolution of that question. So many times he gives hints that don't wait for the speaker to answer that question, but you use your brain, apply your mind to find out, to understand that question. So I think that is the hint. He is asking us to use our mind, to use our thinking capacity, and deal with the question on our own. and not wait for an answer from somebody, or not to look for an answer from various other sources. So I think that is a great hint, and I think maybe we can begin from there and try to explore how we can end up in meditation if we correctly go about our inquiry or investigation. So now Krishnaji has talked about so many things, and some of his statements are like aphorisms, sutras in Sanskrit. So those aphorisms, although it is a short statement, but it may have enormous content behind it, and maybe we haven't grasped it. I mean, just to point out few such statements, when he says that observer is the observed, thinker is the thought, analyzer is the analyzed, experiencer is the experience. So many such similar sounding statements. So all those statements can be taken together as one aphorism. Then there is another statement where he says, you are the world and the world is you. Now that can be taken as another aphorism. Then he also says that the consciousness which you consider as yours is actually not your consciousness. It is part of the universal consciousness. It's only a part. So you are not actually an individual. So then what does that mean? So that can be taken as another aphorism. Then he also talks about, he makes a statement like individual is an indivisible. So individual is not an isolated entity, but it is an entity which is indivisible from the rest of the individuals. So what could be the significance of that statement? So there are, you can point out so many statements from Krishnaji's teachings which are like sutras. Again, he says that wherever there is psychological division, there must be conflict. And whenever he makes such a statement, he says it is a law, which means that it is inevitable. You cannot have a situation where there is a psychological division and yet there is no conflict. And he emphasizes that statement by saying that it is a law. So there are so many such statements in his teachings, and we have heard them, but we have really not tried to understand them on our own. We are mostly looking for what Krishnaji has explained about those things, and then we more or less accept his explanation. But we have never applied our own resources to understand those statements on our own. And probably this is the clue. So this is what we should be doing. So for the time being, we forget about what is meditation, what is it to meditate. But we say that, well, these are some of the statements of Krishnaji, which I haven't yet understood clearly. Or although I have understood them intellectually, but I actually don't have any feel of those statements. They haven't become part of my life. And so I want to investigate them. And naturally, if you want to study these things, you have to take some time off from your daily routine so that you can devote that time to explore these statements. And since Krishnaji doesn't specify any particular time, he says any time is all right. So You just choose a time as per your convenience, and then you try to look at these statements. So maybe out of all these aphorisms, all these sutras or statements of Krishnaji, maybe you pick up one of them which appeals to you most, and then you say that, yes, now let me try to find out what it means, what are its implications. So you apply all your thinking capacity to understand this, because here there is no point in looking for other sources where they have talked about these things, because then it is just like reading those things, and just reading means only filling up your brain with other people's thoughts, other people's explanations, and that doesn't do anything to the brain except making it burdened with all that information. And we need a brain which is very supple, which is very sensitive, which is able to focus all its resources to penetrate something which is very, very subtle. And so there is no point in looking for various explanations. If I have already read something on these matters, then corresponding thoughts will come to my mind. When I start investigating this statement, right, then the thoughts will come from my memory. That is this statement same as what so and so has said, and so on, right? So you consider that, and then you have to see that, yes, maybe this statement may mean something totally different, right? And therefore you put aside whatever is coming from your memory. So you are trying to employ all your resources, all your thinking capacity, all your logic, all your rationality, everything, without keeping anything back. You are employing it to penetrate into the content of that statement. And then, just as you are about to come upon something, there is a disturbance. Either the phone bell rings, or there is a doorbell, or there is somebody in the house coming to you asking for something. And then you say, and then all the energy you had been gathering to investigate something, that just dissipates. And then you may become quite disappointed, because you may say that, why am I not able to have at least an hour all for myself? Why there has to be this disturbance? Which means that I have to look for such time period where I am less likely to be disturbed. There is nothing sacred about a special time period, right? All that I want is I should be undisturbed by any of these interferences. And therefore, when I start looking at various available timings, right, then maybe late in the night, but then late in the night I am so tired, the brain is almost not capable of investigation. It is very tired. I feel sleepy. So naturally that time is also not. So then the only time slot left is the morning, the early morning, before the sunrise. Because that is the time when usually nobody calls you. That is also the time when usually nobody comes to your house ringing the doorbell, and people in the house are also asleep. So there is nothing to disturb you. So you have your time slot, and you say that, well, now this is the time when probably I am least likely to be disturbed by any such interferences. And so you have been able to find out what is the right time for you in order to go about this investigation or this inquiry. And then you employ all your energy, all your resources to get at the core, the content of that statement. Now, just as you are doing it, your attention is completely focused on that statement, and the other thoughts, they come up. Now, if you are merely concentrating, then the other thoughts, they serve as a distraction. And then when you are distracted, you don't like it, you are disappointed. And you say that, oh, I haven't been able to focus, I haven't been able to concentrate. But if you are paying attention, then even if other thought arises, you pay attention to that. And then you have to tell that thought, well, I will be considering it or considering you later. Right now, I am focused on these things. And therefore, if you are able to think it very clearly, most probably you will find that that other thought retreats, no longer disturbs you. But many times it may happen that it doesn't retreat. It demands your attention then and there only. And therefore then you have to just give up your endeavor to understand that statement and then give your full attention, the same attention you have to give to that thought which has arisen in you. And so you investigate that and you find out why that thought is there. Why is it so urgent? Why it is demanding immediate attention? What is so important about it? So with the same attention, with the same resources, with the same energy, you attend to that thought. And maybe you find that that thought is there because you have not been able to finish something during the daytime, which you consider as very important. And therefore, that unfinished important work is reminding you. So that gives you an understanding or a clue that if you leave anything unfinished, anything important unfinished during the day, then it is going to bother you during that 1 hour. So now it is not a doorbell, it is not a telephone ring or mobile ring, but it is your own unfinished work which is bothering you. Your own unfinished event or experience that is bothering you. And therefore, in order for that thing not to happen, right, which means that when that event is actually happening during the daytime, you have to attend to it. You have to see to it that you finish it then and there only. You don't keep it pending. Right? Unless, of course, if it is a physical work or physical task and it needs many other things which are going to take their own time to become available, right? So except for such tasks, everything else, you try to finish it then and there only, because unless you finish them, they are going to bother you precisely at the moment when you don't want to be bothered by them. And so you start paying attention to your daily routine, to your daily activities, and how you attend to various things. Right? So that itself establishes some kind of order, some kind of discipline in your daily life. And you realize that you cannot live your daily life just in any way you like, as per your whims and fancy. You have to live your daily life in such a way that you complete the things, you complete the events, you complete the experiences. And if you are not able to do that, they are going to bother you precisely at the time when you don't want to be bothered by them. And so then you start living your daily life in a more attentive way. You are more attentive to what you are doing. You are more attentive to see to it that things are done properly, completely, thoroughly, so that they don't become a botheration for you later on. So many times we keep on postponing things, and then we feel that, okay, I will reply later or I will do this later. And then many times we forget. But then that thing doesn't forget us. It comes precisely to us whenever we don't want it to come and interfere. So it is better that we keep on completing and finishing the things as and when they arise. And so when you are fully attentive to all these things, there is hardly any scope for the thinker to have its own fancies, likes, dislikes, and all those things. Because you are interested in that one particular hour, which you want to be completely undisturbed, so that you are able to penetrate that statement, to get at the core of it, to get the feel of it. And therefore, that very interest, that very demand starts putting your day-to-day life in some kind of order. So you must have found that if there is any kind of psychological conflict, the effect of that conflict remains in your mind. Your state of mind is changed. And then with that state of mind, you cannot focus or pay attention to what matters to you. And therefore, you have to be very, very watchful as to what is happening to you psychologically as you go through your day-to-day routine. Many times, even a small thing, right, develops into a kind of altercation and conflict, and which then impacts you psychologically considerably. And then you many times find it very difficult to come out of that impact. So that psychological state of mind goes on for quite some time, and which is quite a hindrance for our inquiry during that an hour. So that hour becomes so important to you that you are willing to do anything to keep that time period undisturbed by anything. Therefore, that makes you live your life with open eyes, with attention, so that you don't create something which is going to bother you during that time. So, some kind of order is already getting established in your life, and that order then will give you the space, the leisure, the silence during that hour to focus all your energy on something which matters, which is important. So, in your attempt to understand that statement, right, you have already started creating order in your life. And then you will find that you have more energy and more resources to understand, to investigate that statement. Then we come to the actual investigation. So what do you do when you are investigating? So first of all, you have to hold that statement in your mind, what it is. And then try to find out what it means. What does it basically mean? So you may take clues from what Krishna ji has talked, his explanations and so on. But only a clue. You haven't realized it yet. You don't have to accept it. But according to that clue, you have to watch that statement. You have to try to understand. Then you can also try to find out what could be the implications of that statement. What does it mean? You accept that, what does it mean? What are the other implications? And in what way that statement will operate in your day-to-day life, in your day-to-day function. So you are trying to look at that statements from all the various points of views. Now this is where you have to let your thinking machine to run riot. Just leave it completely to understand that statement. So you are giving a full freedom for that thinking machinery to think logically and rationally and to find out all possible implications and their practical effects as far as day-to-day life is concerned. Full freedom. So there is no such thing as, no, you can't think this way or you can't think that way. Right? The thinking machinery is completely free to consider that statement in any way it likes. But then you have to always come back to that statement. So you may be thinking about that statement along certain line. Go to the extreme. Go up to a point where no further thinking is possible. And then come back to that statement. Then again, the thought may try to understand it along a different line. So go to the extreme of that line. Because you are not preventing or trying to stop that thinking machinery in any way. So this way you may have explored all the possible ways in which the thought would explore it. And when the thought has exhausted all its ways, you will find that you are unable to think. The thought has stopped because there is nothing further it can do. There is nothing further it can investigate. It has tried all its ways. And all this exercise has a kind of awakening effect on the brain. So when the thought is quiet, the brain is already fully awake. And there is a lot of energy in it. And with all that energy, you are dwelling upon that statement, holding it in your mind. And you may find that suddenly there is a completely different kind of understanding of that statement. A completely different kind of realization happens. Now we are describing something which may take months to happen. It's not that in just one sitting this is going to happen. Because whatever that we have said, all the disturbances, the interferences, to work those things out through attention and all those things, it's going to take time, a chronological time. So you don't have to expect that just you have chosen a time, you have sat, you have focused your attention and there is a realization. It doesn't happen that way. You have to really work at it. And we have said that even to establish order in your day-to-day life, you have to really work for it. So maybe it may take several months or maybe a year or more than, or maybe several years even, depending upon how serious you are about the whole thing. But certainly if you are genuinely interested and going about the whole matter in a serious way, you will start noticing the difference after a few months. You will find that, yes, probably you understand those things in a different way. So this is maybe a practical approach to meditation, that what Krishnaji talks about as meditation. Because you will see that when you have poured all your resources to understand something, there is no sense of self. The thinker is absent. And again, we have given the thinker a completely free access to think whatever way it can think. And the thinker has tried all its ways, all its means, and finally it has become silent because it cannot think further. So you have drawn, because when Krishnaji says thought is a limited process, thought is limited. So in this way, you have stretched your thought to its limit. And since you have stretched it to its limit, it cannot think further. It has to be silent. There is no other possibility left for it. And when you are employing all your resources, nothing left behind, nothing reserved, then there is no self, there is no ego. If you keep anything reserved, that reserved thing is the self. And it will just have its then own say, its own tricks it will play. But you are doing everything. Your whole life you are putting into understanding this. So nothing is kept as reserved. And therefore there is no scope for the self or the ego to interfere in this. And then in such a condition where the thought is silent on its own, the self is absent, and there is full attention, that means there is full energy there. So this is the right kind of soil, the right kind of ground for opening up of that different dimension, a different understanding, a different realization. So you will find that that statement was just like a seed. But what was required was the mobilization of all your resources from your own life to be focused on it. So you may say, why only Krishnaji's statement? Somebody may say that I am interested in some other scripture, in some other grantha, and those also contain various sutras. So why cannot I do the same thing with those? Of course, you can do same thing with those. But the only risk is that if those statements turn out to be false in your investigation, right, they get dropped. And you haven't yet come to the culmination of your energies. And therefore, the realization doesn't happen. Much before you have come to the culmination of your energy, the statement has been seen as false and therefore it gets dropped. Then you have to look for another statement. So that risk is always there because you don't know what is the original, what is the authenticity, whether it is a genuine statement or whether it is a projected one. Because centuries or millennia have passed since those statements were made, and we don't know whether other people have added their own things to them. And therefore that risk will be always there. But here there is no such a risk, because we know that this is a statement which is a genuine statement. There is authenticity. It is made by a person called Krishnamurti, and it is available exactly as he has said it. and therefore the statement turning out to be false, right, is very unlikely. And therefore you can go to any depth to understand this statement. So that advantage of authenticity, that advantage of the truth is there. Because listening to Krishnaji is like listening to truth. And there is no limit to the extent you can penetrate that truth, understand that, realize it, and so on. So there is no risk of any kind. And that interest of 1 hour or couple of hours, right, it will create its own discipline in your day-to-day life. And you will see that you cannot live your daily life just in any way you like. You have to live it in a right way so that the brain is completely free to investigate those things which really matter. And so, out of this endeavor, a way of life emerges on its own. The mind acquires a completely different quality. And that way of life is truly religious. Religious in the sense Krishnaji has talked about. So we'll be having a full workshop on religious life. So we won't go much into that now. But all that we are saying is that the meditation, the activity that began in that 1 hour or a couple of hours, it encompasses the whole of your life. It affects everything that you do as your own life. So your daily routines, the way you interact with people, the way you do things, and so on. Because you just can't do things in just any kind of way. You have to do them in a proper way so that they are completed and ended once for all. They don't leave any reminding residue which will keep on bothering you. So then in your relationship also, you will be very observant. And you will see to it that no conflict arises, which is going to take your time and energy. So just this one thing creates such an order in your day-to-day life. So here you have to not deliberately create order, but it is just the need of the hour which is responsible for creating that order, because you are genuinely interested in something. So this may be a practical way of going about it. There could be several different corollaries. I mean, if you can just investigate further, then there could be many different ways this can be approached. But I don't think there is any point in considering that. So we have just indicated one possible approach to this whole topic of meditation. Because we have not actually tried to understand anything on our own. So far we have been understanding things in terms of what others have said, in terms of what our experience is, in terms of whatever we have lived and gathered through that living. So we have tried to understand in terms of that. But we have never really mobilized all our resources to understand something. And therefore, naturally, our brains haven't opened up sufficiently. Very little part of the brain is active in our day-to-day life. But when you mobilize all your resources to penetrate into something which may have very, very deep content, then that wakes up the brain. So then you are not using just part of your brain, but you are trying to utilize the whole of the brain, whatever that is available, whatever that is possible. And that has its own effect. So I think I have tried to cover this practical point about meditation. And now you can ask questions on it. So that may help in bring further clarity to what we have been talking about.
Kishorji, may I ask first?
Yeah.
I've been thinking about what you mentioned last to my question about we squander our energy on various things which are not even of interest to us. We just go about the motions of it, and that triggered some thought in my mind about interest. And today's session also, I think the what I have picked up is it's almost like, and maybe I'm just summarizing for myself, but it almost sounds like this would be the principal interest in our life. So and then that that just generates more and more and more, but maybe it's not that clear to a person like me that this is the interest.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, I think you have raised the right question. I'm glad that you have raised it. Because many people don't know what their genuine interest is. A person may say that he is interested in Krishnamurti. But then when he goes about in trying to understand it, right, he finds that he is really not interested in it. And therefore, he is hardly able to go any further. So, Krishnaji has pointed out two things. He said that how much you will understand from his teaching depends on two factors. One is how much you are interested in it. Because if your interest gets exhausted, then that is where your enquiry ends. You can't go further because there is no motivating energy there. And the second factor, he says, is how far you are willing to go. Because many times situations arise where you are in a conflicting state of mind. You see that something, if you hold on to, you cannot move further into your inquiry. But then at the same time, you don't want to drop it off because you are interested in it in different way. So this is what happens particularly with pleasurable things. There are certain pleasures which you don't want to drop. You want to very much have them, and yet you want to continue with the inquiry. But you also see that if you just get engrossed in that pleasure, then you cannot possibly continue with the inquiry. And therefore, that is the point where you can see that this is as far as I can go. And then to work out that pleasure and to come out of that, how long it will take, I don't know. And so the inquiry stops there. Or it may not be pleasure, it may be sorrow, it may be suffering. And a person may be unable to come out of that suffering. And as long as he suffers, he is not able to focus on the inquiry. So then he has to focus on the suffering. And how long he will take to come out of that, we don't know. But one has to find out where is one's interest really. What one is really interested in. Is it a superfluous interest? That means one just feels that maybe one is interested in this. But then when one goes about it, right, one finds that one is really not interested in it. So it may happen that a person is not interested in anything, which means that he completely lacks the motivational energy. He has no motivation to do anything. He's simply not interested in anything. Then probably such a person cannot do anything. He cannot meditate. He cannot live his life also properly. So he then becomes the victim of the circumstances. So the circumstances will mostly dictate what will be his life. And his life then will be spent in struggling with the situations and fiddling with all those things. So it's a kind of wasted life. And then we don't know what will trigger interest in him, in what way. That is very uncertain. So I think we are not talking about such persons. We say that, yes, there may be a deep hidden interest in a person, and he has to really find out what he is interested in. And if he is able to find that interest, then that can become the motivational energy. And that energy can then give him the right kind of, you can say, a clue or a situation where he can mobilize all his resources to focus on that thing. So there could be various situations in one's life. One of the situations we have talked about when we had this workshop on what is not love. So there we were considering a phenomenon of falling in love. And then what is the state of mind which has fallen in love? So there, as far as the object of that love is concerned, there is probably no self-centeredness about it. I mean, a person can think of the object of his love and he can go to any extent in that thinking. And he is not going to get fed up with it. He is not going to say that how long he has to keep on thinking about that person, how long he is going to this thing. So there, if you focus all your resources, all your energy in order to feel, in order to sense, what is that quality of falling in love? What is that state of mind? So that is another opportunity for such a person, because there all his energies, they flow naturally. He doesn't have to make any effort for that. He just happens to think about that person. He just happens to imagine all kinds of things about that person and so on. And that is effortlessly. So there, if he mobilizes all his energies in order to understand what exactly is that feeling, what it means, what are its implications, how it affects his behavior, and so on, right? And then he will find that the object gets dropped. I mean, the person who has been the focus of his love, that person gets dropped. But that state of mind, which is in the state of love, that remains. So there is actually no center there. And there again, such a state of mind is a right kind of ground, because that state is similar, where there is no self which is active, there is no sense of effort, all your energy is focused onto something. That something is not that particular person. That particular person is dropped. And still that state of mind holds. So that is again the right kind of ground for a different kind of realization to happen. So for somebody else, it may be, he may say that yes, he has tremendous reverence towards his guru. Now it doesn't matter whether the guru is genuine or guru is not genuine. It hardly matters. But whether that person's reverence, that person's devotion, whether that is genuine. And if that is genuine, then he can focus it completely on the object of his devotion. And when there is complete focusing of that, the object gets dropped. It has no relevance. Only that state of mind, which is fully into that quality, that is what matters. And that again becomes a right kind of ground for a different realization to happen. So it doesn't have to be a statement of Krishnaji. We have taken it because we say that we are interested in understanding what he says. But if you find that you are doubtful whether you are really interested in that or not, it's okay. Nothing to feel guilty about. Then you can find out what your real interest is. What are you really interested in? If you are really interested in music, then go with your full resources into that. And that again can give you a different realization. I think the difficulty is that our interests are mostly lukewarm. And therefore, we don't have much motivating or driving energy. And therefore, our investigation then also becomes lukewarm. And then nothing much is gained out of that. Everything happens at a very superficial level. And then the whole life is lived in a very, very superficial way. And the depth and the width of the life is never penetrated, never fathomed. So that is what is important. So it doesn't matter what way you take. Find out what is your real interest and then go with your full resources, with your full energy after it. Many people say that yes, they are devoted to this deity and that deity, but their devotion is also very scattered. They may be doing japa, but their mind is still scattered while doing japa. So the hands are moving, the beats are shifting, but the mind is thinking of something else. And then there is this repetition of those words or mantra, whatever it is that goes on. Now this is a very scattered way of going about things. It's not going to do anything, make any difference to that person's life. He may keep on doing it for the rest of his life and he is going to remain the same, reactive in the same way, responding to the situations, interacting with the persons in the same way, giving more importance to trivial things and getting his state of mind disturbed. So all that thing is going to continue as it is. So then that japa has become meaningless. It's not doing anything. But if he's really interested in that, then he has to pour his life, pour all his resources, pour everything that he has into that. And then it can become effective. Then it can open a door to something totally different. But probably people are so used to live in a superficial way that this kind of thing they are unable to do. And therefore, they just spend their life in superficial way, and then one day they just die. So one has to really find out what is one's interest. And if one feels that, yes, one is interested in this, then one has to really investigate and find out whether this interest is real or it is just some kind of superficial feeling. If it is a superficial feeling, then it won't take you much far. So everyone has to discover what is his central interest. What is that thing in one's life for which one doesn't mind living his whole life just for that thing? Then that is his real interest. And then that can become a energy of motivation for finding out what is this meditation, what is this different kind of understanding.
Thank you, Kisharji.
As you said, it's interest about in a just like at the front of a metal like.
Okay, you are saying that what if a person has interest only in material life, right?
No,
So
no.
a person is
I was.
interested only in all kinds of pleasures. So
Achha.
can he come to meditation through that, right? So is he going through that pleasure again in half-hearted way? Because you see, the very demand for the repetition of pleasure means that that experience of that pleasure is incomplete. If it were complete, you wouldn't have demanded that repetition. Something which is complete, it is finished. There is no question of its repetition. But since there is a demand for repetition, which means that either that pleasure is not complete, or maybe you are just using it as an escape from your other problems, from your other functions and responsibilities. So a mind which is escaping through pleasure is not a mind which is fit for meditation. It cannot meditate. So which means that you have to then employ all your resources to find out why this demand for pleasure, why this craving for it, what exactly is involved there. And therefore, you have to understand this phenomenon of what is pursuit of pleasure, why it happens, what are its implications. So the same approach, you employ all your resources to penetrate into that, to find out. And probably when you have employed all your resources to find out what is the real nature of pleasure, then probably there is nothing more left to explore. The desire for the pleasure has already dropped, finished. But then you have mobilized all your energy, all your resources. So again, the same principle. But in case of pleasure, what happens is that you like to get lost in that pleasurable act. And therefore, you don't want to pay any attention. The state of inattention is what happens when one is completely given to pleasure. The attention is the first victim. You must have realized that whenever you pay attention to whatever that is pleasurable to you, right, the pleasurable feeling, the pleasurable sense is already lost. And therefore, you feel that only in the state of inattention you can be completely given to a pleasure, and then you can really go through that. But then, which means that when you are actually going through a pleasure, there is no sense of feeling pleasure. There is no sense of pleasure there. It's only when you have come out of it, you say that, yes, I had a wonderful pleasure. I had a very pleasurable experience. But that is only after it is over. And so, there is a state of inattention while going through the pleasure. And therefore, there is no understanding of that phenomenon at all. But if you are able to go through that with attention, you will discover that there is nothing pleasurable about it. It is just a sensation. And it is just like any other sensation. And it's only that your thought or your thinking about it, your identification of thought with that sensation is what is giving it a sense of pleasure. But it is just a sensation. And therefore, the moment that is realized, then it gets dropped. And then you also see that just as fear is another kind of sensation, anger is another sensation, so this pleasure, so-called, is also a kind of sensation. So it's not basically different from the other sensations. And therefore, all the interest in the pursuit of that pleasure is gone. So what here we are pointing out is your intention to understand something has to be genuine. It doesn't matter what you want to understand. You may be living a completely materialistic life, right? But if you are genuinely interested in finding out what is this materialistic life, then that genuine interest will reveal to you the whole nature of this materialistic life, and then which will show you whether you want to continue further with that or whether that has to be dropped. And then one has to find out whether there is a different way of living. The point is this, that even to a completely materialistic life, our response is again lukewarm. We are living that materialistic life also in a very superficial way. We have never said that let me go into it as much as possible. Let me go into it with my full resources, experience it thoroughly and find out what actually it is. We have never done that. And therefore, there is no understanding of that either. So it doesn't matter what kind of life a person is living, whether spiritual or whether material, whether this or that, whether he is genuinely interested in understanding that in this different way, so that he grasps the essence of what actually he is living through. And therefore, there is nothing more to be grasped from that, and therefore it gets dropped.
Thank you, sir. And other interest in life, suppose it is not material or immaterial, like someone has a hobby, or someone likes photography, or someone likes to sing.
Yeah, whatever may be
So
the interest, all that you have to ask is whether that interest is deep or just superficial. So you say you are interested in photography. Now, if you are asked to do photography all the time, only photography, nothing else. So are you still interested in it, or you are fed up with it? Right. If you say you are interested in this, then that is the only thing you are allowed to do, nothing else. Then are you still interested in that? So which means that our interest may be very superficial. We may say that I'm interested in this, I'm interested in that, but when it actually comes to doing that, one realizes that one's interest is very limited in that thing. And therefore, it is not the real interest, the central interest. As we have said that the real interest is which will keep you moving with that thing for the rest of your life. If you are really interested in something, then that something can become your life. Nothing else matters. That is the genuine interest. But most of the time we are only superficially interested. And we have such variety of interests, this, that, and that. Right? So we don't say that it's wrong to have several interests. But without finding out your basic genuine interest, just to pursue these superficial interests gives a superficial quality to your life. Then your life lacks that depth, that understanding.
Yes, sir. Thank you. And one more, you said that take the statements of Jerry for starting and contact on that. So, my statement is that who am I? Who am I? The traditional method. So when
you
we
can
ask
take that
then we
statement
have a
also.
point.
Yes.
Okay.
Somebody may be interested in Ramana Maharshi and he may take his statement. Somebody may be interested in Nisargadatta Maharaj, may take his statement. Somebody may be interested in Bhagavad Gita and take some shloka from that. Whatever, it doesn't matter what you take. What matters is whether your interest is genuine, whether you are able to mobilize all your resources to penetrate into that. And if you are able to do that, then that itself will tell you how far that statement is true, how far it holds, or whether it just gets dropped. You don't have to ask anybody. You yourself will realize whether there is any truth behind that statement. And if at all there is, then what kind of truth it is? What are the implications of that? Right? So it doesn't matter what statement you take, provided you are able to focus all your energy onto that statement. And if you are not able to focus, then that statement is useless to you. Doesn't mean much.
Oh, hello. Can you read me? Hello.
Yeah. We can hear you, Gajananji.
Okay. Actually, what I was thinking, sir, this practical method, what you just mentioned about statement. There are two things actually: to penetrate into the statement, to investigate it, and to repeat it. But traditionally, we are used to repeat it. Aham brahmasmi, akarmanyavadikar, repeat. And another, that's one point. So if I take a statement, so I tried that, and then mostly it happens like repeating, then actually penetrating it. And another problem is when we take a statement, Krishna's statement, whatever it is. So in order to penetrate it or challenge it, we have to be skeptical. But we, in the first place, we take it as authenticity of it. And then first step is last. That way, when you take it as authentic, then it becomes very difficult to be skeptical and to challenge it or penetrate it. And the statement of Krishna is so hard. I mean, very difficult to penetrate it. I mean, then only the repetitions has no meaning. You know, observer is observed, thought is created me, and then I am what are you? And then that the same trap repetition we trap. So how to really, I mean, such a hard statement, how to break it, how to penetrate it. That's it. The practical way of penetrating it. That is also another thing.
Yeah. That's right. Say, when we are saying that, hold the statement in your mind, we don't mean that you go on repeating that observer is observed, and you have repeated it 1,000 times, right? So you have converted that into some kind of japa. So that doesn't mean anything. It is completely meaningless and useless activity. When we say hold the statement in your mind, it doesn't mean that you have to keep on repeating it. You have to just hold it and look at it, what it is. And then you give your thinking machinery completely free hand to look at that statement, to think about it in any way it likes, right? And thereby you are trying to look at that statement in many different ways as your thinking machinery allows. Right? So you are not concluding anything, you are not accepting anything, you are just observing. So there is no question of already believing in something and then trying to investigate it. There is no such question. We have taken up that statement for investigation. Right? So if we already believe that yes, this is what it is, then we cannot investigate. But all that we can say is that since this statement is made by a person like Krishnaji, it is more likely to be authentic. It is quite likely that it has true content behind it. So this is not assumption. In science also, right, they assume something for the time being and then they investigate. And if the investigation shows that that assumption is wrong, then it is immediately dropped. So here, all that we are assuming is that maybe there is some truth behind this statement. That's all. We are not saying that that statement is really true. So in that sense, we are still skeptical because we haven't yet verified the truth behind that statement. And that is what we want to do through our investigation. And so you hold that statement in your mind and then you use all your resources in order to understand that statement. So you try to find out what it means, what are its implications, what way that will function or appear in your day-to-day existence and so on. So in all possible ways, you are trying to think about that. And since the thought has been given total free hand, it will actually run riot as far as that statement is concerned. But then it has to come to a silence because it will find that it cannot think any further. It has exhausted all its ways. It has exhausted all its whatever skills, talents, energy, resources, everything has been exhausted. So no more thinking is possible. And therefore, it is silent on its own. And yet there is that energy of attention. So this is completely different. This is not a technique or a method. Because in technique or method, there is some process which you keep on repeating again and again and again and again. And hope that through that repetition, you will finally get the result. So that becomes possible in the physical world. Like say you want to learn certain skills, you want to learn driving, you want to learn to operate certain machine and so on. So there the repetition helps. So that is where the practice makes perfect. That statement holds. But here there is nothing to practice. So there is no question of repetition. So if I take up that statement, observer is observed today for my understanding, for my investigation, then tomorrow when I take that statement again for my observation, do I happen to think in the same way? Then it is not fresh investigation. Which means that I have to again come into that state of not knowing. I say that, yes, I don't know anything about that statement. So let me investigate, let me find out. So that means it is again a fresh approach. It is not the repetition of what I did yesterday vis-a-vis that statement. Whatever I did yesterday with it was finished yesterday only. There is nothing to be carried forward for the next day. The next day again it is a fresh attempt. Right? And therefore a fresh investigation. There is no question of repetition, there is no question of practice. And there is no this kind of saying that, okay, you just keep on saying to yourself that observer is observed, observer is observed. That becomes very ridiculous.
Sir,
Yeah.
I am not sure if we have discussed this, but can we expand on what is consciousness and how is it not ours and a part of cosmic consciousness, like a big, like our, it is part of a bigger consciousness, and how does meditation empty the consciousness?
No, it's a very big question. I don't think we can consider it in details. But
Okay.
certain basic things can be said about it, what Krishnaji has talked. So usually there is a misunderstanding as far as the individual consciousness and the universal consciousness is concerned. So that let us get clear of that. There is nothing special about universal consciousness. Maybe the word universal is not the right kind of word. Maybe we have to say collective consciousness. So as a human being, as an individual, I have my own unit of consciousness. And so similarly, every individual has his own unit of consciousness. But what is the content? Now, according to Krishnaji, the consciousness is made up of its content. So each individual has his own contents as his consciousness. But then all these consciousness put together is what is called as the collective consciousness of humanity. Now, there the definition of consciousness is still valid, which is consciousness is made up of its contents. So then what is the collective consciousness? The collective consciousness is also made up of its collective content. Now, what is the collective content? It is the content which we see in the consciousness of every individual. So what are the contents of the consciousness of every individual? So there is fear, there is anger, there is hatred. There are so much psychological content in that. There is self-centeredness and all this thing. Now the same content is there in the collective consciousness also. So qualitatively speaking, collective consciousness is not different from individual consciousness at all. Usually people think that the collective consciousness is superior, something divine, something different, and one has to just realize it. But that is a false notion. There is nothing divine, there is nothing special about the collective consciousness. It has the same contents as the contents in the individual human consciousness. Qualitatively, it is the same. And whenever individual is adding more and more content to his consciousness by living his life, that content is actually his contribution to the collective consciousness. So if he is living a life of fear, then he is adding more and more fear to that collective consciousness. If he is living a life of violence, then he is adding more and more violence to that collective consciousness. So whatever is his life, according to that, he is contributing to that collective consciousness. And then that collective consciousness belongs to the whole of humanity. And any new human being born, he is going to draw his content of consciousness from that collective consciousness only. So he will continue with that fear, he will continue with that insecurity, self-centeredness, all those things he will continue with that. So he's basically not different from the rest of the human beings psychologically. So now if one sees this, then one can understand how tremendous is the responsibility for living one's life in a right way, so that one contributes right things in the collective consciousness. So every time you are angry, every time you are upset about something, that is what you are adding to that collective consciousness, which is then going to be inherited by the future human beings who will be born. And they will have to do extra work in order to shake it off from their consciousness. So apart from the content, there is no consciousness. Then what is it that Krishna talks about the other dimension and other things? So that is where he talks about intelligence, that is where he talks about freedom and all those qualities which usually we don't see in the content of consciousness. So I think that's all that we can say at this point of time about this. But one thing which is clear from this is that psychologically speaking, we are not different from the rest of the humanity, because we have the same psychological content as our consciousness, as the rest of human beings they have. So you take any person from any corner of the world, doesn't matter to which country he belongs, doesn't matter what race he belongs, what language he speaks, and all those things, right? Irrespective of all that, if you investigate what kind of psychological content he has, you will be amazed to find that he has the same psychological content as you have. He is also afraid, he also gets upset, he also becomes violent sometimes, he is also worried about several things, he also feels insecure, he also feels sometimes jealous, he has the same aspirations as you have, trying to become something, trying to achieve something. So psychologically speaking, he is not different from you at all. And therefore, what is special about you? When you say, no, I am like this, and people should respect what I am. Why should they respect? You are just like any other human being, psychologically speaking. Nothing special. And therefore, if you want to be special, then you have to change all this. And whether one is really willing to change all this. So that is the major point.
Thank you.
Sir, as reference to previous question, if there is no space for consciousness,
Yes.
and we have to our own consciousness, so how will action happen on which ground, or is there something?
No, I think in our workshop on consciousness, we have said that when the consciousness is emptied of all its contents, then the basis of action is different. It is not based on the content of consciousness. Then it is that intelligence. It is then that different dimension from which the person functions. So that different dimension is not part of the consciousness, and yet it can function in the field of consciousness also. So what way it functions and all those things, that it is no point in speculating about it. But unless one has come upon that, one will not understand it. One can only speculate, and speculation probably more likely to be wrong than right.
One
Yeah,
second.
go ahead.
the conditioning is what we get from the collective consciousness, like how Krishnamurti says.
So we have accepted that conditioning, no? From collective consciousness, each individual draws whatever his interests are, whatever life he is living, right? According to that, he will draw from that collective consciousness. So if he is living a life of fear, then he will draw more and more fear in his life from the collective consciousness. And he will also keep on adding more and more fear to that collective consciousness as a way of his life. So whatever is at the collective level, the same is at the individual level also. And whatever is at the individual level, that also is getting added at the collective level. So there is no gap in that. The moment there is a reaction in you, it has already become part of the collective consciousness. There is no time gap there.
Suppose
So human
any country's prime minister,
Yeah.
he has to take decision in his life on that position. So which consciousness he should use?
No, he will take decision as per his understanding, as per how he looks at the whole situation. And as long as there is no self-centeredness, right, as long as he is not seeking personal benefit out of that decision, right, it is all right. Because then that decision is more likely to be appropriate than otherwise. A person who is only interested in furthering his own selfish interest will not be able to take right decisions for others. All his decisions will be according to his own interest. While a person who has no self-interest, who has nothing to gain from that position, right, and he is not trying to collect anything from that position or take any advantage of that position, then he is able to look at the situation factually and then take the decision accordingly to that. He may make a mistake, doesn't matter, but then he is always willing to rectify it. But there is no criminal mistake in the sense that somebody deliberately doing a mistake in order to draw a personal advantage from that position. So such a person is not fit for that kind of position at all. So a person who has no self-interest, who has nothing to be gained for himself from that position, probably is the right kind of person to hold that position. And then he will learn as he operates from that position. He is not operating mechanically, but he is learning. So if he happens to make a mistake, he will correct it and move further, go ahead. So that is how it should be.
But at a higher level or the systemic processes on which you have to go on that path. So you will not take much different decision than that systems or their values or
No. Things, you see, the systems can be modified. So a wise person doesn't take decisions according to the system. He takes decision according to what is right for that situation. And then he tries to modify the system also. So he takes into account the systems also. So if that decision, how it will be implemented by the system, and what are the likely errors that can happen in the implementation, what are the corrupt practices which can enter and try to distort the implementation of that decision. So all those things he will be considering, and then he may be making rooms for that. Right? But for that, then he has to have the reliable, you can say, cooperative human beings who are also genuinely interested in implementing the right kinds of decisions. Right? So all those things together then will give the final appearance to what exactly is happening. So a decision may be right, but if the system has implemented it in a corrupt way, then you may not derive full benefits of that decision. And then some people may try to project that yes, that decision itself was wrong. Let's see what has happened. But what has happened is not due to the decision, it is happened due to the wrong or corrupt implementation of the decision. The corrupt implementation has happened because of the corrupt elements who are occupying the positions of power in that system. So naturally, those persons, they have to be removed and then other proper persons. But then you are never sure whether the other person is really uncorrupt or not. So this is again then results in kind of trial and error method. But then the vested interest, they will keep blaming the person who has taken the decision because they have their own vested interest in doing that.
Namaste, Kishorji.
Yeah, Pawanji, yeah.
Namaste. Sir, you have explained clearly and completely. Sir, yet my confusion and inadequate listening and finding to know the truth makes me ask again, sir. The question is, I don't know about how to empty the cup of its content. In order to empty it, I am accumulating more knowledge. Instead of summation of energy, dissipation of energy is taking place. And the question is, sir, have I the capacity to keep the thought in its right place? Sir, what am I to do?
No, I think the way, see, Pawanji, the way you are putting the question is indicating that you have generated some kind of pattern out of what you have listened to Krishnaji. And therefore, that pattern means that you have to empty the content of consciousness, you have to put the thought in its right place, and all those things. And then you are trying to impose that pattern on yourself. Naturally, you won't be able to do that because whatever is already existing, that will resist the imposition of that pattern. So you just forget about all those things and just ask yourself that can you at least hold a reaction as it arises in your mind and at least look at it. Doesn't matter what happens to it. Can you look at it with your full resources, fully paying attention to it? And that's all. What happens to the reaction will depend on how far you are able to pay attention to it. But then if you are just creating a pattern out of listening to Krishnaji and then trying to impose that pattern on whatever is already existing in you, then you are inviting confusion. So as you have rightly stated, that the confusion still persists because that is persisting because you are trying to impose a pattern. Don't try to impose anything. You have listened to Krishnaji well. Then you have to employ your own resources to actually understand what is happening in your life. Right? That each one has to do by himself. You may take help of Krishnaji, but then the help is taken only as an indication, as an indicator. Not that you make a conclusion out of what you have listened and then try to impose that conclusion on what you are observing, what you are seeing. That is a completely wrong approach. So don't worry about or bother about what Krishnaji has said. Look at what is happening to you and then try to find out why it is happening like that. What does it mean? What are the causes behind it? How it is affecting other things? How come it is there? So your own inquiry into that will bring out your own understanding about it. And then you can say whether that understanding matches with what Krishnaji has been talking about. If it doesn't match, doesn't matter. Investigate again, try to find out. But if you try to find out according to what Krishnamurti has said, then probably you are not genuinely investigating. Then you are merely seeking confirmation with whatever you have gathered from Krishnamurti. And then that is not the genuine inquiry.
Sir, just a curious question.
Yeah.
The way you have coined the phrase for the theme of this workshop, meditator is the meditation.
Yes.
I have not heard this anywhere else in the teaching. Or did Krishnaji use that phrase?
Yeah, he has used it at few places,
Yes, sir.
and he has again further added to it by saying that as long as there is a meditator, there is no meditation. So meditation is to understand what is the meditator. And by understanding what is the meditator comes to an end. And then there is a meditation without the meditator. But as long as the meditator is there, the meditator is going to have its own meditation, in the sense that whatever its activity, that activity it is only labeling as meditation. And it may not, and it is not genuinely what Krishnaji is calling as meditation. So in that sense, every meditator is having his own meditation by practicing different systems, different methods, all those things, and then concluding that yes, he is having wonderful meditation, he's experiencing wonderful things, and so on. So in that sense also, the meditator is meditation, because whatever is the meditator, according to that meditator will be his meditation. So that is one implication of that. And the other implications, as we have stated, and Krishnaji has pointed out, that as long as the meditator is there, there is no real meditation. And then the meditation is to understand the nature of meditator, to understand who is the meditator. And out of that understanding, the meditator coming to an end. So then that is the real meditation. So in many different ways, Krishnaji has talked about the meditator in that sense.
Thank you, sir. Understood.
Sir, I have a question. I'm not quite sure how to phrase
Yeah,
it,
yeah.
so please bear with me. It's
Yeah.
so when there is a conflict, I mean a psychological reaction. Let's just say conflict, and one knows, one hasn't perceived the root of it, or one hasn't really had an insight into it, but intellectually one sees the that one is holding on to something,
Yeah.
which is why the conflict is there. So, so even in that sense, that intellectual understanding is enough to be able to put it aside, in the sense whatever it is, the factors which are causing it. Am I correct, sir?
Yeah, actually, you see,
yeah,
that intellectual understanding at least making you aware of what exactly is the situation. Because many times there is a conflict in our relationship, and intellectually at least we see what is the reason or cause of that conflict. And yet somehow psychologically we are not willing to accept it. We know that yes, I am responsible for that conflict, but somehow I am not willing to accept that. I still hold on to my position, because to leave that position is hurting the ego. And I don't want to therefore hurt my ego. Therefore, I am not willing to leave that position. And slowly, without confronting the ego, if that situation gets dissolved, then that is what I desire. That is what I mostly want. But many times it may not happen. And there may be a challenge to the ego. And then one may end up in defending one's position, although one has intellectually seen that that position is actually wrong. But one is not willing to admit. Because to admit is like going against the vein of the ego. So that exactly is the thing which needs to be paid attention to. So that peculiar state of mind where you see something as wrong and yet you are not willing to drop it, you still continue to hold on to it. So that peculiar state of mind needs to be paid attention to, needs to be watched closely without condemning or without justifying it. So only such watching can make things happen in a right way. We are not saying that will make you understand, but it will make things happen in a right way. Maybe such kind of attention, right? That position gets dropped on its own. You don't have to drop it deliberately.
Especially if there is an action to be done, and this conflict is preventing the right action from happening. So
Yes.
in that sense, the conflict just not doing that action just seems to allow that conflict to grow, or it just perpetuates it for longer.
Yeah, it sustains that conflict for a longer time. Yes. Because one sees one's position as wrong, and one also sees that what needs to be done in order to dissolve that situation. And yet one is not willing to do it. Something is holding one back. So what is that something? It is usually the ego. Ego doesn't want to do anything which will show itself as weak. It will show itself as petty or mean or small. The ego always wants to be flattered, always wants to be big. So anything which makes it feel or appear as small, it is reluctant to do that. So if admitting a mistake makes the ego feel small, then although it sees that as a mistake, he is not willing to admit it because it will make him feel small. So what is this feeling small and feeling big and all these things? So that has to be actually watched by paying attention. And only that can actually bring about a right kind of action. This is a very common situation in our day-to-day life.
Thank you, sir.
Kishore ji, may I ask a question, sir?
Yeah, please go ahead. Yeah.
Sir, in a closure of any issue, be it psychological or personal or at work front, there are two parties involved. So now, through this understanding, if the closure is at an emotional level and at a psychological level from my end, will that cease the emotional or the psychological turmoil within me? Because I have sorted it out and I think I'm out of it. But
yes,
the other party is still probably has his or her own or its own perceptions and reservations about the issue. So can we say that in the real sense, the resolution has taken place?
Yeah, I think as far as you are concerned, you are out of it. You have nothing more to do with it. As far as the other party is concerned, they are still holding on to their perception of the situation. And they are still expecting a certain kind of behavior from you. But since you are out of it, there is no point in going back to the same thing again. Right? But you may look at it differently. If those other people are willing to listen to you, then you should be willing to talk also. But if they are not willing to listen. They are merely interested in imposing the same perception which they have and from which you have walked out. Then there is no point in listening to them also. Then it is better that they are left to themselves, whatever they may think about you. But you are out of it, you are nothing to do with it anymore. And therefore you live your own life in your own way. So I think that is what could be the right action in that situation. Otherwise, there is no end to it.
Thank you, sir.
So
Sir,
time
one
to
small
stop.
question.
Okay,
Sir,
okay, Pawanji, go ahead. Yeah. Since this is the last session, so we don't mind any number of questions. Yes.
Yeah. Sir, regarding the interest, sir. So all my interest, whether superficial or deep, it is all related to myself. Then how can one go about that oneself, sir? It takes entire life to find out the depth of that interest. So if I have what is the genuine interest, all the genuine interest related to me only. So how can I go to it completely?
No, forget about it, because the interests are only related to you. It is you who is interested. So that is okay. Why that should become a problem? Or you want to say that in the interest also there is self, and if the self is there, then there will be again conflict and problems and all those things. Then you are merely repeating what Krishnaji has said. Again, you are trying to look at things according to the pattern you have formed by listening to Krishnaji. Put it aside. You say that,
Sir,
yes,
to
you are
put it
interested in
aside.
this.
How can
It doesn't matter that interest is self-centered or this or that, right? But if you are interested in something, then how far you are willing to go with that something? Is your interest sufficient enough to make you go right to the end of it, or whether it is superficial? Therefore, after a point, you just get disinterested in it, and you say that no, you are no longer interested in it, right?
So
that
what to do
is to
about
be
this?
found out.
Lukewarm interest you have mentioned, sir. This is the case.
Yeah, lukewarm interest. So that is what we have actually explained, a case of a person who doesn't seem to be interested in anything. Most of his interests are lukewarm. So he tries something according to his interest, and he finds that he's not much interested in that. He thought that he was interested, but actually he is not interested. And when he finds that out, then he stops there. Then he explores something else. And he can spend his whole lifetime in trying to find out what is his interest. And yet he may not find it out. And therefore it is a wasted life. And which means that he doesn't have sufficient passion about anything. He is very lukewarm. So which means that then he needs to go through more severe experiences which will awaken that passion in him. So life has its own ways of going about it. So a person who is intensely passionate about something, doesn't matter that something may be wrong, but at least his passion is genuine. And that passion then can be turned to something which is right. But if you have no passion at all, then you simply can't do anything. You cannot do right thing or you cannot do wrong thing. So the whole life becomes very, very superficial. And therefore, for such a person, the real thing is to inquire into why there is no passion in his life. Why doesn't he feel passionately about anything? What's happening? So that may be the genuine inquiry for that person. All other inquiry may be just superficial, just academic.
Thank you, sir.
Hello. Sir, can you please explore more on passion? I don't know what is my question, but listening to you, I may good understanding.
Yeah, you are asking what do you mean by passion?
Same context, you know what you talk now.
Yeah. You see, the lack of passion means lack of energy. And for lack of energy, there could be various reasons why one lacks energy. Maybe one is not living one's life in a right way, and therefore there is a lot of wastage of energy. A life given completely to pleasure, a life given to completely sensations, is a life which will lack energy. And wrong practices, a person who has become alcoholic, right, then he lacks energy. Person taking drugs, he lacks energy, because those things, they have their own effects on the body. And if the body is in a debilitated state, naturally such a person will not have any energy or any passion for doing anything. So there is a kind of dullness that pervades the life of that person. And that dullness has come because of the misuse of the body, because of wrong practices one has done in one's life. So, which includes not only all the intoxicating material, but which also includes the wrong kind of food, which includes the overindulgence into anything, all those things. So that is the misuse of the body. And if the body is misused, then naturally it will respond in its own way. It will not have energy to pursue. And so a brain is in some kind of dull state. And then such person will not feel like doing anything. And that inactivity or that inactive state can go to even such an extent that even if a phone rings, he doesn't feel like picking it up and answering the call. It can go up to that level. Or if he is feeling thirsty, but then to get up and get the water and drink is too much for him. So he just keeps feeling thirsty unless it becomes unbearable, and then he has to really make a compromise whether to get up and drink water is means less effort than just suffering from that thirst. So it can go up to that extent, this inactivity, this lethargy, this heaviness, this insensitivity. So if one is having that kind of problem in one's life, which means that one hasn't been living one's life in a right way, and therefore one has to really investigate, inquire into what are all the things that he is doing in his day-to-day routine, and find out what are the things which could be the possible cause of this, and then start eliminating them, and therefore restore the sensitivity of the body, and then there can be passion. So it's all depends on the person, what he wants to do with his life. And if he doesn't want to waste his life, then he will investigate each and everything which is affecting him in some way or other, and then arrive at the right kind of action. So lack of passion, I think, is a much more serious matter than may appear.
Sir, Sai sir.
Yeah.
Sir, would that mean like when a person found out his genuine interest, so there wouldn't be any effort in his life when he's doing, I mean, it doesn't feel like a job to him, right? So if I got it
Yes.
right. So
Yeah.
there won't be any,
Yeah. When
there won't be
he's
any efforts to make.
genuinely interested in something, then as far as that something is concerned, he has no sense of effort.
So, or I mean, because we are all driven in everyday's personal life that we have to earn some money. I mean, to do
No, that is
a
okay.
job which
That is
gives
okay.
us security. And
So he will finish off his routine work as quickly as possible and get back to his real interest. So that real interest will help him how to manage rest of the things in his life, so that he is able to draw maximum time to pursue his real interest. Right? So that will create some kind of order in the rest of his life also. So he may not just keep on lingering on certain things which can be just finished in a matter of small duration of time. So then he will try to do things attentively and finish them as quickly as possible to come back to his real interest. So that will create its own order in his life. So he doesn't have to worry about it.
small sub question in this. Please correct me, sir,
Yeah.
if I'm wrong in this understanding this. So when you said ego, I mean, which always tries to win, which always looks for happiness, right, sir, if I'm not wrong, which always wants to portray as a winner. When you said it always wants to be flattered by someone or a judgment or some nice words. So when I feel happy in trying to do something, and when I figure out that that is my real interest, genuine interest. So am I in the game of am I falling somewhere that is it the ego or is it the real interest?
Yes. See,
Because
if it is the ego, then any obstruction in that interest is going to generate irritation and agitation in you. Then that interest is egocentric. Because then ego is pursuing that interest for its own reasons. It may be either escape from the other boring routine, or it may be to achieve some position, or it may be in order to strengthen itself, or it may be in order to expand itself further, and so on. So any obstruction in your basic interest creating a psychological reaction in you is an indication that your interest is egocentric, and therefore you need to look into it more. But if it is not egocentric, then that obstruction will not irritate you, but that same genuine enquiry will then be directed to that obstruction also, and you will try to find out why that obstruction is there. Why is it coming? And is there a way to get over it? And then you will do whatever rightful action is needed in that case, and you will remove that obstruction. So there is no unnecessary psychological reaction to that obstruction. Right? So you may be interested in something which may be very trivial in the eyes of the others, and they may just ridicule you for that. They will say, oh, what this interest, what is there in that thing to be so much interested, and so on. Right? What benefit it is going to give you in your life, and so on. So it's like, say, somebody genuinely interested in poetry, and the other fellow is saying, will your poems earn money for you? If it doesn't, then what is the use of those poems? Throw them. So there could be such reactions from others. And therefore, if those reactions start making you think whether to pursue that interest further or not, then you are not genuinely interested in that. Then it is just a superficial interest. you are genuinely interested, then it doesn't matter what the others say. Whether they appreciate or whether they don't appreciate, doesn't matter. Right? And only in the genuine interest, your excellence will come out. And when that excellence comes out, then people may recognize you. But that's a secondary matter. You are not doing it for their admiration. You are doing it for your own genuine interest.
So thank you so much. Yes,
And
I mean, this
something
brings up a
more,
lot
we
of
may say it
clarity.
in our next workshop on religious life. So what is a religious life? That will be. So that religious life emerges out of his meditative state, out of this meditation. So usually, sometimes Krishnaji talks about meditation first and religious life later, or sometimes he talks about religious life first and meditation later. It depends on his approach and so on. So in this series, we have put it at the end. So let's see what it means and all those things. So we'll consider it there and there. So you will receive the intimation at appropriate time so that you can decide whether you want to participate or not. So now we will end this meeting. It has lasted almost for 2 hours. So this being the last one of
Thank
this
you.
workshop.
Thank you very much, sir.
Yeah. So we'll say goodbye for the time being till we meet next year.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you,
Yeah,
thank you,
thank you,
sir.
sir. Take care.